Okay, Dr. Robert Sands back for another great insight of your experience on our next subject, which today is about identity. And we've obviously exchanged some ideas about identity, and I really want to hand over to you very quickly. And something that came up for me about what we were saying about identity revolves around about, do you think people just choosing, an identity that can be devoid of basic factual information? Do you think it's a need to escape from the identity that basically they do have, that they do actually live by? And one of the things I was thinking earlier on is about how you know how identity normally is based in a factual, what people see, what people experience about other people, and then just to suddenly decide that your identity is outside of what everybody experiences about you. I'm very interested to hear what you say about, is it about escaping from who people are when they choose to, kind of shut themselves down from what their identity actually is? Over to you, Bob. Let's hear what you have to say on the interesting topic of identity.
Well, a good place to begin is with children and how common it is for children to assert identity that is different than the reality that we all know is surrounding them. Many children assert that they are animals. They assert that they are the other sex. Yeah, I've had probably 5 referrals from school districts where a child insists that they are a cat or a dog and they're behaving as a cat or a dog.
Wow.
So it's not uncommon. Identity really results from the emergence from childhood diffusion. Identity diffusion is when you really don't know who you are because you haven't developed any sort of life experience. Identity comes from the interaction of the child with life. It's not something that's announced, which is a popularized, I have to be careful. I want to say an insanity, but it's not an insanity. It's a wrong think.
Okay, yeah.
It's out of touch. It's wrong thinking to assert that a child simply has to say who they are, and everybody should bow to that and say, oh, well, thank you for telling me that you are an astronaut, or you are a dog, or if you're a girl, you're a boy. That children say those things, and that's because they haven't developed. So identity is a developmental line. It begins with diffusion and the opposite of identity. It might be amorphous, without form, or it might be narcissism. We can bring some words in here, but we don't want to get too wordy in discussing it. But the child is basically narcissistic and undifferentiated. They haven't experienced reality. They think they can cause things to happen with their mind, and they cannot. In other words, we have developed as adults, and it's our job to guide them through the developmental process so they can become who they become as a result of a complex interaction of many years of encountering people. And so I would object strenuously, if there's a point to this discussion, it would be to say that self-identification, even though it can be asserted by all of us, we can say, I'm a this, I'm a that, but self-identification is a terrible mistake for a child to embrace it and propagate it and honor it and to bow to it as if it's somehow true self. This is the true self of the child speaking, and it has ultimate authority. This is wrong think. I don't want to say it's insanity, but it's out of touch with basic reality. And that is a betrayal of all of us if we do not connect our children with reality. then you're not serving them, and it's certainly not in their interest, and it's not in the interest of all of us to abandon reality testing.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's just a comment on the beginnings of identity formation.
And what you said there is very, very interesting regarding, so say if you've had children come to you, parents with their children come to you, one would assume if you've got a child who thinks they're a cat, there's an obvious process that from a psychiatric point of view, there's a process that you would take the parents and the child through in order to obviously educate the fact and illuminate them to the fact that, you know, they're not a cat. And even though they might like cats and they might like the way cats behave and, you know, all that kind of stuff, they're not actually a cat biologically, and, you know, from everything that we know about cats and humans, they aren't. Is that what actually normally happens to a child who identifies as an animal?
Well, you do understand that children can, particularly certain types of children, can enter into beliefs that can last for years. And so the first thing you do is tell parents, well, don't argue with them. You do want to correct them and say, well, no, you're not a cat, but we understand you love cats. So you don't beat them up over it, but you don't agree with them and say, oh, you're a great cat. And if you do that, that's, there's a background of understanding that the child will come out of it. And if they don't, then you would say, well, then they're serious beyond into, they have states of process. And the job of the parent would be to tell the child, well, dear, you're not a cat, but, you know, and then you try and give them more attention or something. You have a strategy, and lo and behold, they come out of it. So most children that have, let's say, unusual identity beliefs come out of them if they're not reinforced by their parents and by the school and by their peers, who start buying into the abnormal state of mind.
Okay. So therefore, if you have a child at school and the school is giving them kitty cat for their treats and allowing them to wear like a cat suit and allowing them to kind of immerse themselves in it, it really is going to obviously have the opposite effect. You know, if they call the cat Tiddles, the person Tiddles, you know, that reinforcement, obviously, because I suppose deep down and consciously they, you know, I don't know again if it's an escape thing, but obviously to constantly reinforce it is going to, I can only imagine, cause a separation from, you know, trying to take them onto a path of their, you know, their natural identity, which, you know, is a person. And what I'm interested in, if you can answer that one first, and then why would a child do that? Why does a child, and you know, these days it's a very, very interesting issue. Why do they deviate from their identity as, you know, just normal boys and girls? And what do you think causes that deviation? I mean, is it just they're now flooded with this? In my opinion, I'm going to totally take ownership of my opinion. You know, it's a complete bombardment of this bizarre, you know, idea that you know, people can be something that they're not. But just go back to you and just answer the question about the reinforcement and why people deviate from their natural identity.
Well, I mean, there are mental disorders that are lend to this path and outcome. Autism is one mental disorder that is pretty well known, and there's different degrees of autism. All children with autistic spectrum do not have fantasy identifications, if we could call it that. A fantasy identification is that in their world, their autistic world, they're not paying attention to the outside world. And so they're more caught up in their own world. And the hope is that they'll emerge from that as they grow and their brain grows and as their disorder shrinks. You want the disorder to become smaller and the actuality of the child to grow and become more dominant. So they come out of their fantasy or autistic state. And that's usually the case. These are not common, but identity confusion or diffusion, there's another popular term, identity diffusion. What you want with the child is to help them identity consolidate, to consolidate an identity. And that takes years, years of schooling, years of interaction, years of actual encounters with their peers and with their teachers, billions and billions of experiences that form identity, which is very different than just saying, well, you can just tell me who you are and I will accept that, even though my eyes tell me otherwise. And so the problem, as I see it, is that the society and the adults are becoming convinced, or maybe I would say brainwashed into that they're doing a child a favor if they embrace the false identity or the fantasy identity or the autistically derived identity, instead of being patient, just letting it be, letting kids be kids, and then watching the child develop and come out of that. So you don't want to necessarily argue with it, but you don't want to reinforce it. And the schools, for example, would not want to give the child cat treats who believes they're a child or that they're a cat. So
but it's what is quite interesting that is so let's go on to say let's dive in the deep end, shall we? And let's talk about obviously what's happening in the world now, where you've got people thinking that it's trying to make laws about making people collude with an illusion, and it's like the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? It's like there's one thing about saying you know, people want to identify as A, B, C, or D, whatever they want to identify as, and then expecting everyone to collude in the illusion. And I find it harrowing that governments would say, okay, you're going to be fined if you don't collude with this illusion. You're going to, you know, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be put in prison if you don't collude with the illusion. And where does that, I mean, where does that leave people? Just give me your, you know, from a psychiatric point of view. I mean, it's almost like a mass psychosis in a way. There's like some strange, huge, you know, global bizarreness that you can't just go, well, actually, biologically, or, you know, you're not a horse. You like horses, you know, you might like to dress up as a horse, you might like to make horse sounds, but, you know, you're not going to live in a field off grass. And you're not going to tell me I have to call you Neddy, you know, and that's it for the rest of life. I mean, do you think these adults are treatable? I know that sounds kind of a bit of a kind of thing to say, but can just talk to me about what you think about this current state of this thing, this identity thing.
Well, remember that most people look at it and shake their heads, and they are in reality, and they're doing just fine, and their children are being held in a protective container of reality testing that protects the child from deviating into their own fantasies, that the fantasies gradually give way to reality. This is a normal developmental path, that children are full of fantasy and wish fulfillment and narcissism. They want their way, they think they can do all sorts of things. And then gradually, with the container of the schools and the parents who are grounded, like we're having a grounded conversation. You're asking how many people are being brainwashed into this false belief. I would call it a terrible error. a terrible error to believe that a child or an adult could simply assert that this is who I am. If, for example, there is race cross-identification, there are Caucasian people saying, I get to decide my race, so I'm going to decide that I'm another race, and so forth. So these are minorities, and I think the average person knows there's something wrong with this, but when it becomes codified in law, and where it becomes dangerous to speak against the delusion, and I'll call it a false belief. A delusion is technically a break with reality. So it might be fair, but it's not a mental illness delusion. It is a mass hypnosis delusion or a mass formation. There's terms when a whole population starts to believe something false, and that there's a whole history of populations believing crazy things, and they do crazy things. So, but in this case, it's that most people, I think, no, this is wrong. And when professional people speak up and say, like I am, saying, well, this isn't good, this isn't in anyone's interest, I disagree with this, that, for example, boys and girls are not interchangeable. If I were to say that in some settings, I would be open to losing my medical license through a process run by activists who then target. So the targeting of people, this is a free speech issue. Is that, do we have the freedom to speak like we are now? We're speaking spontaneously. This is not scripted. I'm speaking the truth of my experience. And yet I could be, by law, potentially sanctionable because of the encroachment of legal authorities, or that and I know professional people have lost their jobs because they say something even fairly mild, like, I don't know if this is smart, encouraging boys and girls to think that they can interchange. And I disagree with the schools promoting that idea, and they would be toast. They would be gone. It's happened, and it scares people and inhibits them from thinking clearly. And there is the possibility of it taking over, but I personally don't think so, because it's too nutty.
And what's fascinating and kind of terrible about that is, who are the people in these professional organizations? Like, you have a professional organization, probably a global one, of psychiatry that you're a member of. Who is it that's at the top or making decisions that they can bar certain psychiatrists or people from practicing because they have a balanced idea and a logical response? Who is it? Because it's a really kind of disturbing thought that there's someone high up in these organizations that's going, no, we're no longer saying that this is a biological male and a biological female, and you telling a boy that they can't be a girl, you can lose your job for that. Who's actually making those decisions?
Well, that's a whole topic, is how the professions have been taken over by activists that are at odds with the membership, and how the membership, and it's really, you might say it's the fault of the membership being too passive. In my group, and I've written letters of protest, and I requested our president to poll the membership as a way of countering the activism.
Oh, great.
She did not do that. She chose to. So the opportunity was missed to bring the organization back into the fold of the membership. Instead, it's being taken over by activists who are very passionate. They are not interested in debate or dialogue or dialectic discussion like we're having, which would be to look at how could this be?
Mm.
And it's happened to the endocrinologists. It's happened to the pediatricians. The child psychiatrists are more or less on board with it. And so it's kind of game over, game over. They've won.
Wow.
And
Well, in the
the
long
general,
term, they've lost a lot. You know, they've lost the whole idea. I mean, you know, you hit. I heard something. This is a few years ago, but I think it is still valid when you hear the comparison. There was a guy, and he was talking about doing gender reassignment surgery. Okay, and he was some top guy in the field. And he said, you know, it's like me having someone with severe anorexia come to see me. And anorexia is a known psychological kind of imbalance. And it's like me having this person come to see me, and they desperately want liposuction because they think they're so fat. And it's like me giving this really thin, skeletal anorexic liposuction. And it's like these people are psychologically imbalanced, and you're saying that surgery is going to correct a psychological imbalance. Giving a severe anorexic liposuction is not the answer. You know, giving people who are confused and distraught about their gender or their identity, cutting bits of their body off is not the answer. And really, how have we got so far away from, you know, treating the holistic, you know, person and the whole reasons of why people want to escape from what they were or are? Or tell me about what you think about that.
well, I mean, this is a huge topic that's now becoming more appreciated. And so the example of the anorexic getting liposuction is fair because it's joining with the false belief of the individual that they are too fat. And so you're going to join with them. There's a psychiatric term called folie à deux, which means folly of two.
Yeah.
It's a shared delusional system that can be shared, usually within a family or between a husband and wife, where they join and believe false things together. And so it's the folly of two, a French term. Mm-hmm. This is folly. This is a folly of thousands. And what's going to readjust it are the thousands of lawsuits that are coming that will cause so much pain to the practitioners of these surgeries, these mutilatory surgeries, and the abandonment of the professional organizations of standards that are 100 years old. They've abandoned these standards. Mm-hmm. One standard was called watchful waiting. Mm. Now, watchful waiting is when you, if a child comes to you with distress and they think they want to change their sex, you just work with them for years, and then it disappears. In 85 to 90% of cases, it moderates and then disappears, and they move into acceptance. Mm-hmm. Talking with children about their distress over their life is the work of psychotherapy and parents. Mm-hmm. To love and support a child. You understand their distress, but you don't join with them and say, by accommodating to your idea of what you need, we're going to really help you. If you don't want your breasts, let's cut them off. Mm-hmm. If you want to become a girl, let's cut your genitals off. Mm-hmm. And that seems, in our conversations, seems ludicrous. Mm-hmm. And yet it is widely accepted. Mm-hmm. It's promoted by the pharmaceutical industry because they make a lot of money with it. It's promoted by the activists who have captured the professional organizations. Mm. And that will be reversed within 5 years. You know, okay. Take my word for it. The lawsuits will cause a reversal.
Well, you know what's quite interesting about that? I watched I've watched quite a few videos because I am interested. Well, it's gone a bit dark because all the sun is kind of coming up. I've watched quite a few videos on people who've had gender reassignment. And obviously, I don't know, people, oh, how come it's that time already? Obviously, people are sometimes, delighted, sometimes very disappointed, and it causes more problems. But I watched this video not long ago, and it's a girl who used to be a boy, a female who used to be a male, and she's holding a bucket almost of medication. And she's actually saying the only people that really benefit from all of this in the long term is big pharma. It's the pharmaceuticals. I have to take a massive these tablets every single day to stop rejection, to stop, and I think that in itself, the fact that, this massive medication has to be taken in order to try and suppress the body's natural way to reject what's happening to it and to fight against it in a way. And it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking to see that it's like, okay, and then the other people that really wish they hadn't had it, and then they go back, and then it's, I mean, we're obviously nearly already out of time, but I saw something the other day, and it was, again, I'm a woman, born a woman, and I see, men dressed up as women, and it's almost like they've seen women their whole life as a pair of false eyelashes, bright red lipstick, and a pair of boobs. That's what they think it takes to make them female. And I have to say, me and a lot of women I know find it completely insulting and enraging, that you think that you, just because you've done that, you now think you're a woman. And it's just like, wow. Do you not see that the female fight, the female identity that's had to go through life in various things as a woman? And what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you're putting it very well, because they're wanting a caricature of a woman.
Absolutely.
It's a superficial representation, like a cartoon or a caricature. A caricature is when you take certain features and emphasize them, that has very little to do with the actual underlying person.
Absolutely.
So this may be an ending point on the realization that there's an absurd set of ideas being propagated through the culture. There are people objecting to it. They will gain traction. There will be lawsuits and increasingly eloquent objections, and this will be turned around within 5 to 10 years.
Wow. And it's going to be quite a storm, isn't it, to have all these people going, wow, that is it. But it's in a way, what I just want you to talk about just for a few moments is, before we, time's just racing on. But do you think, say, someone who is, do you think, say, take an adult who's in this gender confusion, should I say, and they look at the people who've done it, and then say, they say that, well, don't do it. I mean, psychologically, is there a path? Is there a path to quelling that confusion, to quelling that desire, to absorbing and reestablishing an identity as they are? Have you experienced with that? Seen that?
Hundreds, thousands of cases I've worked with have a lot of gender dysphoria, objection, and gradually you work with them. For example, girls who don't want to be a girl for different reasons. They view it as onerous. They want to have their own way. There are boys that fear becoming a man because they think being a man has a certain caricature or stereotype outcome. So they think they can get away with it by feminizing or identifying with the female position, which is safer. So you might say that anxious boys have an easier path to being a girl, but if you work with them and encourage them and say, you can do this, you've got what it takes. This is a good path. You encourage a child and they move into their proper identification.
Wow.
So there's a long tradition of working with children and adults to help them identity consolidate, not diffuse their identity in a way that's at odds with reality. We're really in a fight for reality testing. In my view, our culture is seeing things that are untrue and they're nodding acceptance. And that's not good for the average person to be seduced into believing something false.
And of
it's
course,
not good for any of us.
No, and what's interesting in our world at the moment, because I remember reading somewhere what a small percent it is of the population that's actually, in this identity kind of crisis. It's actually a really small percent, but this small percent is getting massive coverage. And you have to, again, ask yourself, who's benefiting? Why the massive coverage for a small percent of people who are going through this identity confusion? And it's a curious thing to go, oh, that's quite interesting, that because you tend to think, wow, it must be like 50% of the population is going through this terrible stuff, and it's like 1% or 0.8% or something. I read once. It's like, wow, it really feels very skewed when you see how much press and media coverage and propaganda that's getting out there and into schools. It makes you think, wow, it's very imbalanced. It's very out of whack, isn't it?
Well, it speaks to the vulnerability of the average person to be brainwashed. And yet in their hearts, they know something's wrong with this, but they don't speak up. But they will speak up. Things will turn around because reality always wins. I mean, reality doesn't go away. It really doesn't. Biology doesn't go away.
Absolutely.
And human development doesn't go away. And the professions will, the professions have done some pretty terrible things in the past in these mass confusions. And this is one where the lack of courage and the lack of involvement will be to blame, I guess, for why the professions have joined with these dark forces. These are dark forces that are pursuing money and power, and why someone would want to destroy a culture and destroy reality testing, that's beyond me.
Absolutely. Which is why we're having the conversation. I mean, what you said, identity consolidation versus identity diffusion. And, ask any level-headed person, which one's going to bring about a healthy society, a healthy world, healthy communities, and, a kind of stable, balanced person surely is going to say, well, obviously consolidation, once you consolidate and you have confidence and you have everything in place, then, it spills out and so it makes you think there's a destabilization in the propaganda of this minority of people, and getting the thing that worries me most is the pliable minds of children, and it kind of getting in there and causing all kinds of unrealities, like you say.
Well, self-identification is at the heart of the problem, allowing and encouraging and believing that a child just has to say, I am this or I am that, and everybody scurries to adapt or accommodate to that wish is a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake. So.
And it's like you said a few videos ago, and I know we've got to wrap it up now, but you said about, children are a cog in the big machine of a family. They're not the cog, they're not it, they're not the focus. They learn how to be part of this wonderful machine. And then the family is the neighborhood, the community, the town, the city, and therefore it goes out. So.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to finish before, we could go on, as you know, for hours. So let's put a lovely little line under this. I think I mean, we'll have a little discussion if you want to do some more on this, and then we can come back and we can discuss that. But thank you so much for your time. I just feel like I've just scratched not even the surface. I'm half a scratch, kind of, the iceberg underneath. But thank you so much. I'm going
So
to.
you may get canceled for allowing us to speak about this topic.
Yes, and I'll be interested because obviously I put this on YouTube and then on Rumble, so it'll be interesting if YouTube actually censor it, and then it'll be really quite something, won't it? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it'd be very interesting. Thank you so much for joining me again, and I really, really look forward to either expanding this even more. There's a topic I would like to get your opinion on. It's something that you kind of phrased, the matriarchal society, and I'd really like to talk about that with you because it's, again, something very close to my heart, the role of women in the world. And thank you, Robert Sands, for your fantastic time and your insight and your enthusiasm and your passion. You and I are very passionate about this subject, and as you can see, the way the world is giving notice to these dark entities, giving exposure. So, but thank you, and look forward to seeing you again.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.